talk. My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based in Brussels, and I'm coming at you from the Euractiv studios live in the EU quarter, where we have a live audience here in the room, as well as you watching at home. Now, we know that right now in Brussels, everyone's focus is on the war in Ukraine. And as the war rumbles on, policymakers in Europe are looking for ways to urgently reduce dependence on Russian fossil fuels. As they deliberate, the answer may be all around them, in the very buildings that they're sitting in. Buildings are one of the largest sources of energy consumption. They account for 40% of the EU's final energy consumption and 36% of its greenhouse gas emissions. Now, boosting their energy performance and moving to low carbon forms of energy could greatly reduce the amount of fossil fuels needed, and that would help the EU's efforts to fight climate change while also increasing Europe's energy security. As part of its Fit for 55 package put out last year to implement the goals of the EU Green Deal, the European Commission has proposed a recast of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, the EPBD. The recast would increase the rate and depth of buildings renovations, improve information on energy performance and sustainability of buildings, and ensure that all buildings will be in line with the 2050 climate neutrality requirements. It therefore could be a powerful tool within the Commission's REPowerEU plan to reduce dependency on Russian fossil fuels. The Commission is expected to adopt the legislative proposals for the REPowerEU plan tomorrow. Electrification of heating and cooling in buildings is also an important component here, since it would facilitate the switch from fossil fuel boilers to more sustainable electric solutions. The EPBD revision also stresses the need to develop e-mobility by implementing recharging points in buildings for electric vehicles, particularly to support smart charging. Today, we'll be talking about how the EPBD can best contribute to all these climate and energy security goals, and we'll also talk about what the technical challenges and solutions are to increasing building efficiency. Perhaps most importantly, we'll be talking about how we can increase citizens' awareness of how improving their housing's carbon footprint can also save them money at a time when a lot of people are struggling with rising energy prices. So now let me introduce to you our panel of experts that we've assembled to talk about this issue today. We have Bryce Lalonde, president of the Équilibre des Énergies, a nonprofit decarbonization platform for stakeholders in the energy, construction, and mobility sectors. We have Marianne Giola Fabri, head of research and buildings performance, head of research at the Buildings Performance Institute of Europe, BPIE. Welcome. We have Erkki Meillard, senior vice president for European affairs at the French energy company EDF. And we have Stefan Moser from the European Commission's Energy Department. On your agenda, you'll have Paula Pinho. She unfortunately was unable to join us today. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's a very, very busy time for the Commission as they are preparing all of these different things. So we're very lucky that, Stefan, you were able to come in and join us today. Now, you guys at home will be able to ask your questions to the audience using Slido. You can see the field to do that there on your screen. Also, you all here in the audience can also ask your questions on Slido. You should have the code there at your seats. Put those questions in, whether you're watching at home or in the room. I'll see them here on the screen, and I'll be putting your questions to the panelists at the end of the panel. So let's go ahead and get started. Stefan, I'd like to start with a question for you. Obviously, everyone's really closely watching this piece of legislation. What can the Commission do, what can the EU do through a revised EPBD to improve the existing regulatory framework that would, in a way that would support the decarbonization process in the building sector?
Thanks a lot, Dave, and good afternoon to all of you. Very happy to be here. So the EPBD recast is to indeed provide the regulatory tools and to speed up decarbonization, but also energy security needs and energy dependence needs, which we have now increasingly been facing in Europe with the tragic aggression by Russia against Ukraine. But of course, we had energy security always on the agenda, energy independence, reduction of imports of fossil fuels. And as you said, Dave, the heating and cooling needs of the EU are to a large degree still served by fossil fuels, and the building sector is just such a huge chunk in the overall energy consumption that this is where we really need to make progress. Of course, buildings policy is not newly invented now. It's a kind of recast. It's a further development of the existing framework, with the main objective now to speed up to more than double the existing renovation rates and to deepen them through better information tools and planning tools. For instance, we would like to improve the national plans as the relevant framework on which everyone, stakeholders, any actor can rely on. Identifying the barriers and the ways how to overcome those barriers, including capacity constraints, social issues, skills, and then the financial support, technical support, that everything is clearly enshrined. Also, what are the national objectives? And that basically we use these plans upfront also to compare across the borders what are the good practices, and to have a kind of review mechanism in place that we make sure that we look at the plans before they're finalized and then they are improved as much as we can. So that's a reflection of the fact that member states will remain in the driving seats, of course, also in the future. But we have noticed a number of weaknesses so far, which have somehow had a negative impact on the effectiveness of building policy. One is the quality of information, really, in the energy performance certificates, but also the lack of, I would say, a strategic approach when it comes to individual buildings. Often a renovation is triggered by a particular need, safety, aesthetics, a sudden leak, for instance, but often not in a comprehensive manner. And that is actually exactly what we would like to change, that there's a clear sense of direction being established, also with a new vision of zero-emission buildings, recognizing that a large part of the improvements to a building will be on energy efficiency, making sure that the energy needs of the building are reduced. But this is not the only part, that we integrate that with the renewable energy agenda, that renewable energy will be used for the remainder, for the energy needs which remain for a building, and that there's a kind of optimization between the two. That is definitely recognized now with the vision of a zero-emission building. And then also we would like to have a much higher degree of deep renovations in a structured manner, through building renovation passports, which allow to address renovations step by step, but in a compatible manner, that you don't lock in a building by having done something and then you can't really touch the rest anymore, but that you think how you address it step by step, minimizing the negative impacts on inhabitants, but also making sure that from a financial and technical perspective, this is best addressed. And then, of course, we have as you mentioned, the mobility needs, linking with the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation, which is on the table as well, making sure that we have enough recharging infrastructure outside the building in the public space, but also inside the buildings. Also mobility needs on bikes, for instance, on other forms of transport. And then, of course, the very important issue of system integration, energy system, making sure that renewable energy is primarily produced on site or in locally organized forms, in order to minimize the need to expand the grid, to reduce the burden on the grid. And also what we have proposed, and that is considered by many as the main element, is actually an accelerator to address the worst performing buildings through minimum energy performance standards, which are not basically, I would say now, a uniform EU mechanism to rectify the weaknesses of the entire EU building stock, but rather make sure that there's a specific attention given to the worst performing buildings and to prioritize them within an ambitious time schedule, so that basically things which have to be done anyway will be done upfront as quickly as possible. But that the worst performing buildings are identified at the national level thanks to the energy performance certificates, to classifying the buildings with the aim of being able to prioritize, to really put the money and the efforts where the biggest benefits are generated. And of course, there we have then the big social dimension also, that we have very strong public goods character of building renovations, improving living conditions for citizens, the climate energy policies more broadly, but also safety issues of the building, accessibility, serving the urban development also in terms of greening cities. So that is very important to keep the perspective, in the sense that synergies are generated, and that we have a strategic approach to that, involving as much as possible citizens, and in an active manner, that basically the needs and the objectives are defined through basically local initiatives and very strong hand-in-hand coordination with the municipal planning authorities.
Great. Thanks a lot, Stefan. It's interesting what you say about the renovations not being comprehensive and that being a problem, that it's kind of these spot fixes, right? One thing goes wrong and you just fix that thing. And if you can find a framework which encourages people to actually do a systemic renovation, it's a lot better for the whole system. Merangiola, let's turn to you next. You've been researching these issues. Tell us a little bit about how important buildings are to decarbonization efforts overall.
Well, you mentioned how much they consume and how much greenhouse gas emissions they emit. So they are clearly a key component. And a year and a half ago, we started really looking at how much the contribution of buildings was against the upgraded greenhouse gas emissions targets for 2030, and which is now at 55%. And our estimate was that buildings really could contribute to 60% of those reductions. And in order to achieve that, we do have a sort of a recipe that is quite obvious to those working in buildings and simple in its formulation, but it has been debated for a number of years. So first of all is really making sure that we minimize the needs that the energy needs of the building by really providing a high energy performance, and then that we supply the remaining energy needs through renewable energy, as Stefan just mentioned. From that perspective, renovating building becomes really an essential issue, because the new build in the EU is a very small proportion. And so really making sure that we do renovate our buildings, and in our estimates, which should really go up to 3% of annual renovation rates. But this becomes really an essential element. But buildings serve a number of purposes, and so when we do renovate a building, we also have to consider not only what needs to be done to minimize their energy needs, but also what needs to be done to make sure that the comfort that they provide, that the quality of life that they provide, and also the role that they have in allowing the strong decrease of energy poverty that is still existing in the EU is taken into account. From that perspective, making sure that when a renovation is scheduled, takes into account not only the right sequence of steps that needs to be made to make sure that we do not do an intervention today that might hamper a successive renovation a few years later through the use of building renovation passport, for example, is absolutely essential. And at the same time, we have to make sure that we can provide that information to those who in the buildings live and those who own the buildings. So it is absolutely important to give agency to the building owners to provide not only that information, but also the policy framework, the tools that they need to make sure that the moment that they have faced with that decision, they have everything they need in terms of information, policy support, and financing to actually do it, and do it in a way that it's most beneficial to them, and it's most beneficial to the reduction of the energy needs and the greenhouse gas emissions that are linked to the buildings.
Yeah, it's an interesting point about how, I mean, you can have new buildings with all of these great energy savings potential, but the new buildings are actually a pretty small proportion of what we have with our building stock, and so renovation is really key. Okay, let's turn to you. When we're looking at the draft text that's now on the table, do you think that what we have on the table is up to the challenge?
Very good text. It's let's say it directly. I think it's a very good proposal. It's ambitious. When you look at the targets, it's practical. I think Stefan already explained how member states will be empowered, but also citizens and consumers. And also, I think there is a very positive evolution towards more electrification of uses. Look at mobility, for example. You have pre-cabling into buildings, and this is something clearly very positive, because we know that electric vehicles are, I mean, the electric engine is more effective, efficient than a thermal engine. And I think the biggest change, in a way, and the most positive one, is this idea that we should look not only at energy efficiency, but we should have this CO2 compass, and we should also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And this is now clearly written into Article 2, if I'm correct, of the directive, and that's very positive. Of course, we can always improve the text. I would underline a few of them. One, I think, if we look at this CO2 compass, so to say, if you want to really target the worst buildings in terms of emission, because as it has been said, you have a lot of existing buildings, and they will stay here for more than 40 years. I think 70% of the stock will still be there in 2050. So if you want to target the worst emitting buildings in terms of CO2, we should incorporate this CO2 element into the certificate, the energy efficiency certificate. It should be part of the passport also that has been put in place, and integrated also in the proposed mandatory minimum energy performance standards. I think if we integrate this component into the standard, it will be an improvement. Then when you look at mobility, I think there is a difference in the text made between residential and non-residential buildings. We think it's not necessarily useful to make this distinction between the two. And also, and I think that's my last point, and we'll come back to that, but I think the biggest issue that we are facing with this proposal is the fact that it considers, when it looks at the energy, it's the only energy considered is renewables, and especially renewables on site. And we think it's not a cost-effective way and to look at the issue. You have plenty of electricity without CO2 on the grid, and we should take this electricity into account. For example, you have when you're in a residential building, there is almost no consumption during the day because people are at work. So the solar panels are producing for the grid. And then at night you will use the energy from the grid, and in some countries you have low carbon electricity already available. So we shouldn't consider. I mean, it's a bit short-sighted approach if you look only at the solar panels on site, which is good. I mean, we should roll out much more renewables. And let me conclude maybe by saying that it's not only a good text because of energy efficiency, and this has been said by Stefan, by you also. When you look at the Russian aggression against Ukraine, logically you would say there is a positive combination of energy efficiency and energy independence. But let's face it, it's not automatic. You can replace the import of fossil fuel from Russia by other fossil fuels. If you reduce the energy consumption of buildings, and for example you start to replace gas boilers by much more efficient solutions like heat pumps, for example, you will meet the two, you will reach the two targets. You will meet both challenges to get rid of fossil fuel as a whole and have a better consumption result, and then you will see also the result on the bill for the consumers. But I'm a bit afraid today when we talk about the consequences of Ukraine. I think there is a very good unanimity saying we should not get rid of climate targets, and which is perfectly fine, but it's not automatic. We could be, I mean, in 5 years time from now, we could be in a situation where we have the same amount of fossil fuel into our economy. We will build more gas infrastructure to replace, to get more gas from abroad. And at the end of the day, we will miss an opportunity to improve the rate of electrification to our economy and have. I think it's the right time, and this text, the EPBD, is a good tool to move into the right direction.
You know, when you talk about the lifespan, it really drives home how different buildings are from vehicles, for instance, right? Because when a building is built, it's here until 2050, which we still think of as such a target that's so far away. And certainly we'll have all new vehicles on the streets by 2050, maybe above the streets. Who knows how vehicles will evolve, but the buildings will still be here. This building we're in right now will probably still be here in 2050. So it's really, it requires a lot more long-term thinking, doesn't it, buildings? Bryce, you are talking to many of the different stakeholders here. I'll put the same question to you. What do you make of the text, the draft text that's now on the table?
Well, there is a big improvement from the first draft. Greenhouse gases reduction. What's the cause of climate change? Greenhouse gas emissions. So if you don't concentrate on reducing greenhouse gases, you're not going to make it. And so, as we are happy to have this new emission reduction dimension, now we should see if the tools are aligned on that dimension. And it's not exactly the case, in my view. First, the energy efficiency performance is measured in primary energy. Primary energy does not exist. It's a concept, different from member state to other member states. And it hinders electrification because it only applies to electricity. So there is an handicap on electricity. And everywhere in France, for instance, I have this experience for the last thermal regulation of houses. It's an incentive for natural gas. So at the moment where we try to escape from dependency on Russia and Russian gas, it's a bit paradoxical, I would say, to have a regulation which is an incentive for natural gas. Second, I think, as Mr. Maillard said, we have this energy certificate, but the reduction of greenhouse gas emission is not a compulsory dimension of these certificates. It's optional. Each country can do what it wants. It should be compulsory because, as I said, that's the main cause of climate change. And in the end, yes, it's true that we are quite surprised that on the one hand, this directive says each house or building should be sort of independent, like a little island, depending on its own source of energy, a local on-site. And on the other hand, we have the European Union saying, hey, you must put more and more renewables, more and more low carbon in your networks. So why is it that the houses would not be allowed to tap on the energy, on the low carbon or on the renewable sources of energy in the networks? Either biogas in the gas pipes, either renewable electricity or low carbon electricity on the electric grid. It seems inconsistent. So these are the three main problems, weaknesses I see on this new directive, which, by the way, is much better than the first draft.
Mary and Julie, I wanted to come back to you from the research perspective. We've been talking about Russia and how the drive to make buildings more efficient and more electric is going to intersect with the drive to lower fossil fuel demand. From your research, what's the potential there? Are we able to really quantify what that potential could be?
So today, we published a short piece of research that we just did in the past few weeks to just have an idea about this. So we did look at 8 member states with different shares of import of gas, not only from Russia, different shares of import of gas from different countries, and looked at what was the potential savings if we renovated, so walls and roofs, very simple measures on the envelopes, and we considered all the potential savings up to with a minimum 20% energy savings, because we wanted to make sure that we would include the largest part of the buildings, and also the buildings with a slightly higher energy performance would be included, because those will be renovated at some point in time anyways. And out of these for these 8 member states, on average, we found out that 45% of the final energy consumption can be saved, and 44% of the gas consumption in the heating, in residential space heat, could be saved. This gives you a measure of how much buildings can contribute to really phasing off and phasing out fossil fuels. The priority is, of course, making sure that we reduce our dependence on Russian gas. But from the long-term perspective, from a climate perspective, and from an energy security perspective, we must make sure that we phase off fossil fuels, full stop, in the long term. And the most sustainable way of doing it, as I said before, is making sure that our buildings are built and renovated at a level where we minimize the energy needs. That would allow supplying the remaining energy through renewables. I want to make a point clear. The decarbonization of buildings and decarbonization of heating and cooling cannot only mean electrification of heating and cooling. Reducing the energy needs and really improving the performance of the building allows a better fit of the electrification into the buildings and a better fit of the use of renewable energy for this. But it's really, really important that these two elements go hand in hand. They cannot be put one against the other. Renewable energy and reduction of energy demand must really go hand in hand. And they have to be really considered as the first and the most important, the priority steps that need to be taken when looking at the EU-SAVE plan and the REPowerEU and the recast of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which I agree, the text is that is now on the table is an improvement of what we were dealing with before, but years and years of research on how these texts were implemented and how difficult it is for member states to catch up, I would say, and maintain the ambition that the European Commission has put. It really requires even more courage when it comes to the text. And all the conversations that we're having now in regards to the REPowerEU, in regards of really the important role that buildings can have also in securing the energy supply across Europe, should be included, cannot be dismissed. And so there are a number of improvements that can be done to the buildings. Stefan mentioned them. We do have suggestions on how to be more ambitious and how to do them in a way that can be more easily or faster, quicker implemented. But the point is that we cannot really dismiss the important role that the buildings have. Also, in terms of facilitating really the integration into the grid of renewable energy and the flexibility that it will be necessary. We cannot just simply thinking that we will increase the supply of electricity. We do not live in an infinite, in a world where the resources are infinite, so we need to make sure that we can use them smartly and that we really also take into account what needs to be done to provide the just transition that is also part of the EU objectives, and it's also part of the Fit for 55. And making sure that buildings are properly renovated contributes to all of these objectives.
You mentioned 45%. Stefan, as we're looking ahead to REPowerEU proposals, does the Commission have the balance right here between very short-term finding urgently new sources of fossil fuel. And looking at these, I think particularly the existing proposals that came from Fit for 55, we're in a kind of weird situation here where we have proposals on the table. The Commission is, I mean, I think we're now relying on the co-legislators to adjust these for the new reality if they need to be adjusted. So I guess my question to you is, do these proposals that have come out as part of Fit for 55 need to be adjusted in light of the new reality with the trade war and the need to lessen Russian fossil fuel imports? And if so, is that up to the co-legislators to do it, or is it possible the Commission can act?
For the question, Dave, I think it's a co-responsibility of the Commission and the co-legislator. So the Commission can, and if I may say so, will also tomorrow make such proposals, at least mention ideas, and of course then this will be on the table of the ongoing legislative processes. And of course the other two institutions, the European Parliament and the Council, can at their own initiative also draw conclusions from what they see as pressing needs. I think, if I may say so, we are pretty much in agreement that a lot needs to be done very fast, and the member states broadly recognize that. What is the biggest obstacle is actually the perceived constraints in the economic capacity to deal with these challenges. How much can we renovate? Where do we get the people from? Material constraints. And that's something which was already a challenge from before the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and which is now further aggravated if we want to accelerate. And I think that is the practical question which at least many actors, including the member states, ask themselves, how do we actually manage? We have already put on the table, even on a national basis, very ambitious renovation programs, and deployed massive resources. And in many cases, member states simply say, we are simply struggling already. So how do we now further increase? And I think what we are saying is that some of the constraints can be addressed through a very strongly coordinated approach to invest in more capacity in training. It's in principle an economic opportunity to have such a high demand for activities which are useful, where we know what to do, because that reduces unemployment or even takes it completely away. The question is then, how do we actually get the people, possibly even into Europe from outside, because we don't have enough people anymore. But on the, I see that more as actually also a huge opportunity. Just a few years ago, we were talking about mass unemployment still from the economic crisis. This has basically gone away as I would say, as a major concern, because there are enough economic opportunities. People need to be helped to train to get into for instance the building renovation sector, not only for technical skills and manual skills, but also engineering, architectural design, digital skills. So it's a huge opportunity which we have here, and it requires a concerted effort across all actors to do that. But that, I think, is the major challenge, the practical question, how to do all that. And also of course the financial resources needed for it. So which are also an investment into the future, because we, at the same time as we invest, we have certainty that we reduce our future exposure to shocks, to price shocks on the energy markets, and of course reduction of bills for imported energy.
Erkki, I wanted to ask you, follow up on something that Marianne Giola said about electrification, that we don't have an infinite supply and that we can't completely rely on electrification for improving the building stock. Would you agree with that characterization? And how do we get the balance right between efficiency measures and electrification?
Well, I would say the answer could be one word. It's the heat pumps. I'm not saying it's the trump card and you can solve every problem, but the beauty of it is that you have both energy efficiency and renewables when you use the heat pumps. A heat pump is 3 to 5 times more efficient then it generates more energy than it consumes, first of all, and it uses renewable sources, the air, the water, or the ground. And I would say it's a no-regret solution in a way, in that respect. And I fully agree with what has been said about the need to combine energy efficiency and the rollout of renewables. And the heat pump is one of the solutions to move into this direction. The second one is also the smart grid deployment. We can use, it's true for heating system, but it's also true for charging. And I'm glad that the EPBD recast is looking at smart charging and actually also V2G, vehicle to grid. And this is also a source of flexibility. You've mentioned flexibility as an important aspect to master this challenge of the volume of energy that will be used for buildings, and using these technologies such as smart charging will help us to move into this direction. And I think there is a lot of more than experiment actually happening on the ground. First of all, to come back to heat pump is not anymore a prototype. It's an industry with a lot of people working on it. Most of them actually working in Europe, in member states. I think the figure in France that we had close to 500,000 of heat pumps deployed last year. And the difficulty here is more a question of manpower, as Stefan said, for the renovation. It's true, it's the same for the deployment of heat pumps. But to sum it up, I agree. Energy efficiency and electrification goes hand in hand, and I think supporting the deployment of heat pumps is a good way to move into this direction.
Move on to some of the technical challenges that are being encountered now, particularly with electrifying the EU's building stocks and bringing this electrification, including heat pumps, but also other solutions. So Bryce, when you are talking to stakeholders, what are the biggest frustrations you hear? What are the biggest technical challenges that need to be solved?
Well, obviously, for instance, heat pumps, it's a little more expensive than normal solutions we had before. You have also technical challenges still in multiple family houses. It's still a little complicated, so you have to adapt or perhaps have new regulations to have the height of the house a bit higher because you have to put the heat pumps on top on the roof, things like that. You have, I would say, storage perhaps, put batteries. Some countries put batteries in the houses to store electricity, so it's storage. You need probably also to have smart management, smart metering. It's very important to know what's happening exactly and to be more and more, to save more and more electricity. And so, I mean, I think, it's also what you said, renewable heat is very important. We think also that in the new regulations for houses, you could perhaps introduce some things saying that all houses should be PV ready. All houses, I mean, even if the owner does not decide to put photovoltaics, solar, electric systems, at least the house should be ready to do it. You never know, and later on it could happen. So there's quite a lot of things like that which could be done, which will be helpful for the end, even if for the time being it seems perhaps more expensive for building the new houses or for renovating the old houses. But I don't see really major hindrances. I mean, the real problem is political. If you want to fight climate change, you have to switch from fossil fuels. It's not only reducing energy consumption, it's also switching away from fossil fuels. And that must be at the center of the regulations.
Mariangiola, would you agree that the biggest challenges are not technical, but rather political?
I would say that the technical challenges are not the only one that needs to be taken into account, and very often there are solutions to technical challenges. The when we do our research, and we did a lot of research in the past, when we developed the notion of building renovation passport, for example, we went and did surveys in the countries where we tried it out, and to understand what were the really the difficulties that individuals had when deciding and taking decisions about renovating. And the technical barriers were not the only ones. There were barriers that were in terms of access to information, access to skilled workforce, and access to the products and the material, but also to a sort of renovation service that was missing. Anyone who underwent a renovation in their own house know how cumbersome that can be, and only little has to do with technical issues. So I do agree that there is it's not only a political problem, not at all. But I do believe that the opportunity that is given now by the Fit for 55 package and the recast of the EPBD is actually the best to make sure that we do address all the challenges that can be solved by political willingness. So that we give member states and we give the citizens that will have to live with that legislation the instruments and the knowledge that they need to make sure that they can take the right decision. Because when we decide to renovate, having a building, we call them climate proof, no, climate ready, so that any intervention that I decide to do today in my house, I know that it's not going to be a problem when I decide to do another intervention, whether it's in 10 years, 5 years, or 20 years. It doesn't matter. We need to make sure that there is, the moment there is a decision to renovate, there is the information and there are the solutions, technical, but also in terms of information that are needed to make sure that that decision is taken to the benefit of the owner, which also equals and must equal to the benefit of the grid and the climate target. So it's really a systemic view that we need. So we cannot just break it into pieces. When we do break it into pieces, we have to make sure that every piece contributes to the best of its capacity and equally doesn't hinder any future progress.
So, Stefan, we've heard that the technical challenges are surmountable. We have record low unemployment, so the labor challenges should also be surmountable. The problem that's left is maybe the political challenges. You described some of the resistance from member states or the difficulties experienced by member states. How do we get over these political hurdles?
Thanks. I would not call them just political challenges. I think there are material challenges which have to be addressed on the one hand, of course, by very bold political decisions, but also then very strong economic and technical efforts. So I think it's the and of course a concentration and activation of more resources. I think it costs for the investment part very, very significant amounts of funds which have to be generated, which are investments, but nonetheless, it's a major effort. So, and I think we need to recognize, and it's not just the member states who say that. I fully agree that these are very important challenges, and it's very difficult to address them. But now or never, basically, is the time to sit around the table, basically, develop very operational national plans with the best possible information basis which we can generate. And then to prioritize the resources for the biggest challenges, which is the worst performing buildings, but also the buildings where overall we get the biggest benefits in terms of reducing the use of fossil fuels, reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the building stock, and ensure that that there's the best possible benefit for the citizens and for the broader development of society, both from a social point of view, but also from the climate, environment, energy, and transport and social agenda, basically, which we have. So I think it all flows together. But what we need is a reference framework to take away the uncertainty, which hinders investments, basically, because those investing rightly so, have the legitimate expectation that they will make money, that they will not lose money at least. Yeah? And I think they need to have a predictable framework. What are the policies? What are the priorities established at national level, but also European-wide? How do they get certainty that the bottlenecks like skills shortages, shortage of people actually overall, not just skills, but simply the number of hands available to renovations, that the supply bottlenecks on important raw materials are overcome, and how to do that. Yeah? So to have also then access, of course, to information, what would be possible substitution products in case there are very important bottlenecks on materials. How do we get over that? And how do we also make sure that we develop as much as possible a circular economy in the building sector, that we don't waste any scarce resources which are already in the buildings, and also new products which are put in the buildings. And I think that's extremely important to have this cooperative approach, really. And I think we need to work at all levels, and all levels means also the citizens, the local level, and of course the national, regional and European levels, with all stakeholders, and have a very close consultation, that something is not just dictated either from Brussels or from the national capitals, but have a kind of integrated and bottom-up consultation, really. What are the shared objectives with the citizens, also in terms of what they would like to see for their own city, for their own village?
One more topic I want to explore with you all before I take the questions that have come in from Slido is consumer knowledge, and how do we really educate citizens about what they can do, particularly right now as we're dealing with these rising energy prices, and we know that this is a big concern for people as they're getting their annual heating and electricity bills. So Erki, let me put this question to you. How do we inform citizens of the advantages, which are sometimes not evident because the payback isn't immediate, right? How do we motivate homeowners to say, yes, you'll have an upfront cost, but you're going to save money over the long term?
Well, as it has been said, it's an investment to renovate, to have a new heater or new appliances. It's an investment, so you expect a return. You have capital expenditures and operational expenditures. And what we see in Europe is you have good and bad practices, good and bad regulation, and that regulation can make or break actually this renovation wave or these investments. If you look at countries like Finland or Italy or the Netherlands, all of these three countries, for example, they decided to reduce taxes on the OPEX, on the electricity, and that boosted the heat pumps market. And some of them, not all of them, but they supported also the investment, the initial investments. And for the consumer, then it's pretty clear. And actually, for example, companies like ETF, but many others do. But we have offers where there is no need to explain to the consumer; they can understand quite well. You do the math. This is an investment. You have reduced taxes on electricity, so it's cheaper to have electricity compared to fossil fuels. And then we have, unfortunately, less fortunate experiences in other countries where fossil fuel is less taxed than electricity, and then it's an uphill battle for a consumer to change their equipments. And unfortunately, this is the case for many member states, where you actually have not only more taxes on electricity, but you still have some subsidies and incentives for fossil fuels. It's sometimes when we have a conversation with people who are outside the industry, they think it's a joke because they read everywhere, let's get rid of fossil fuel and imports of gas. But actually, you have a lot of incentives in some countries, and you are disincentivized to switch to lower emission technology. So I think the answer is not simple, but we know what to do. We know that reducing taxes on low carbon energy sources is a no regret solution and a win-win solution.
Bryce, what would you say is the best way to educate consumers about what can be done here, and also to make sure consumers can actually know their own carbon footprint and what they're using?
Well, to know what your carbon footprint is, it should be mandatory on the certificates. These famous certificates, it should not only be energy performance, it should also be the carbon footprint. Like that, the customer will know exactly and can improve its footprint or reduce it. And the same thing would be in smart metering. Now you got these apps on your phone, you can know exactly what you're consuming. And you could have an alarm saying, okay, you're going too far, etc. So I mean, you have lots of means now to do it. Of course, we're not going to have every customer or every consumer to be an activist, but I mean, it goes in that direction. More and more you can do it now with these numerical, digital technology. So I think there's no problem for that. But I would like to come back to one thing, which, in my view, I'm surprised that most of the directives of the Fit for 55 are based on Article 194. But Article 194 says nothing about climate change. It's all about energy. And the article which it should be based or mentioned is 191, where you speak about climate change, and you can have in your regulations not only the energy efficiency or the carbon footprint, but also the adaptation to climate change, to winds of 200 kilometers an hour, etc. That's not at all in the new proposal. Adaptation to climate change. It probably is a new dimension. So I think the climate should be in the Article 194, or at least all the directives should mention Article 191, which actually speaks of climate change.
Let me go to a question that's come in from Slido, from the audience. I actually don't know if these are from you guys watching at home or you in the room, but this one comes from Jules Cordillo from Schneider Electric. Marianne Giola, let me put this one to you. Now, the discussion so far has been focused on fuel switch and passive renovation, but active energy efficiency, like some of the things you were just talking about, Bryce, controls, monitoring, sensors, digital, has been sidelined in policymaking. Digital technologies can renovate 10 times the space of traditional solutions with the same budget. So how can we better reflect their role in the EPBD? So, Mariangela, would you agree with the potential of these solutions, and how do you think they could be better referenced in the EPBD?
I cannot speak to the potentials because we didn't do any research on that particular element, so I'm not going to comment on this. I think that the smart solutions are part of the solutions. I also think that that they cannot be considered the first go-to solutions either. It really depends on a number of things, not only about the characteristics of the buildings, but also how they function and how easy it will be for the users to actually adjust to those. That being said, it is absolutely important to make sure that we do integrate all potential solutions in a building. Our take on this is that smart solutions could, for example, really be considered where renovation is not possible, or where renovation only brings to that much improvement in terms of energy performance. So where the intervention on the envelopes and other parts that are more structural cannot be done, integrating smart solutions can be really, really, really important. The reason why we're saying that is because if you live in a leaky building, the building remains leaky and uncomfortable, no matter how those. If there are not interventions, structural interventions on its envelope. So no matter how smart the solutions that you provide, they might not overcome and they might not compensate for the benefits that can be brought in by interventions that have the comfort and the well-being of the occupants also at the center of their of the attention. And I do think that for some solutions, for certain building typologies, most of these solutions are automated. There's a maintenance person, they will take care of this. But some of the solutions that are now also provided to residential building owners might not be that easy to understand and to use. So there is also that component that needs to be taken into account. Not to say that they're not useful, absolutely not. But I think there are a number of elements that need to be taken into account. In terms of its potential, as I said, we have not really researched that in depth.
It's true what you say, knowing your own energy consumption isn't that helpful if the heat is pouring out of your windows. I'm thinking of many apartments in Brussels I've had where it would have been interesting to know, but there was nothing I could do about it. Stefan, do you think that these digital solutions have been adequately taken account of in the EPBD proposal?
Yes, definitely. They are extremely important as part of the overall, I would say, toolbox. Key to success will be user friendliness. That basically everybody, including those who are not digital experts, feel comfortable with them, and that they provide useful information for them, for us, because I include myself in that. I'm not a technical digital expert. I simply want to have accessible and useful information, and I think a lot can be done to optimize that. That includes, in particular, information on how to improve the heating, for instance, to target really heating and cooling to your needs, that you and then to consume energy, have signals clearly when to consume, when it's cheaper, for instance, to have price signals and be able to react to that, and possibly even automatized mechanisms like the most important household machines, which would then be activated. And the same for heating. Heating systems are great storage. They can already heat up the water, for instance, at times when electricity is cheap, or energy generally is cheap, and that can be programmed in a way which does it automatically, or just requires an initial decision by the inhabitant, by the consumer. And I think without digital and smart solutions, we won't get there fully. At least we don't exploit the full potential. So they're absolutely crucial as part of the solutions for the entire building range. And then, of course, smart solutions more broadly would also include actually natural shading and natural ventilation, measurement of air quality, which I think is also very important, because we have to make sure that there are no negative effects from good installation. These tools are very cheap, very effective, and can then alert inhabitants if there's a need to have maintenance, have someone check whether everything is still working fine. So I think there will be a huge potential which can still be exploited, which is not yet fully exploited now.
So the next question is for Erkki, and it has to do with whether the existing electricity grids can handle all of the new load that would be needed, particularly for heat pumps. So the question comes from Philippe Garrick, who writes, flexibility as per energy efficiency first principle enables systems efficiency. Buildings represent 40% of consumption and often more than 70% of the annual peak demand. Building heating choice has great impacts on renewable integration and infrastructure efficiency. So how do you make them visible in the EPBD? So has the proposal taken into account what's going to be needed for the grids?
Maybe I'll let Stefan answer to what extent this text is taking into account the grid aspect, but to answer the question related to volumes of electricity, the answer has been given not by utilities, by the producer, but by the TSOs, by the grid managers, and they say that we can cope easily with more heat pumps on the ground. They will not lead to blackout in Europe, including because you have flexibility on the system, on the grid, flexibility mechanism, and also because heat pumps are, as I said, more efficient, so to say, by nature. Again, they produce more energy than they consume. They reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by a factor of 10. It's maybe worth mentioning again. For the climate, it's good, but for the energy consumption, it's good, and I think for the grid as well. And I think that leads back to another question: is how we integrate more electrical solution in a world where the resource is not infinite, in fact, and that's where flexibility plays a major role. I think we have that into EPBD when we look at mobility, for example, and we believe at EDF, for example, in the V2G technology. We need to deploy more of these technologies, but we believe also in smart charging. You've mentioned the water boilers. In France, it's already a major source of flexibility, and you can have price signals. You will use your boiler when the price is low, and use the heat from the boiler when the price is high. And you can actually do the same with cars and have more flexibility. So that leads, me to the conclusion. You can actually accommodate and use more heat pumps while smart charging, or also all the other electrical appliances and equipments. Then for the text, I think Stefan is the best person to answer to your question on how much the EPBD is integrating the grid factor.
I'll go to you in a second, Stefan. I just wanted to put one more follow-up question to you, Erki, because we're talking about the grids, but also there's a question here for the electrical systems in the buildings, some of which may become overloaded by a heat pump, for instance. So Quentin de Huil from the European Copper Institute asks, with the impact of electrification, should the EPBD not also address electrical installations inside buildings as a technical building system to ensure their safety, efficiency, smartness, and future readiness? Erki, and then I'll put this to Stefan.
I think what has been already what we may have missed already is also to mention the use of that type of technologies for the industry, because I hear that that the question is coming from for copper industry. These type of technologies are also efficient for the industry. You can use them to get the temperature as high as 100 degrees, for example, for industrial processes. Then for the support of these technologies into buildings, as it has been said, I think the first no regrets gesture is to insulate the envelope, the structure, because you can have more and more efficient equipment into your building if your roof is not properly isolated. Then you've mentioned that also with mentioning Brussels dwellings. It's easy to understand that you will miss the target, and it will not be the most cost-effective solution. So there is no need to support for more investment into smart equipments or even heat pumps if you do not start by insulating and renovating buildings. And I think we have with EPBD this direction is clearly written and incorporated into the text.
So, Stefan, is the text adequately addressing the electrification needs both outside on the grid and inside the buildings themselves?
Thank you. I think the EPBD is not the only instrument. We have also, of course, the broader electricity and also other internal market legislation which addresses infrastructure, but also how actually the overall system operates, and the adequacy assessments are part of that. Yeah? So, and of course, with the evolution over time, we have to reassess precisely what will be the necessary loads and how do we deal with them, how do we optimize the management of the energy system. I think I'm losing the thing. And the same is true for within the building. And I think the capacity of the building, the electrical installation in a building, will have to be reassessed from time to time, whether it's still fit for purpose and would possibly have to be upgraded. Yeah? So also to bring in more smartness in a building. Of course, if we have a building from the 60s and 70s, they are no longer up to standard. We have that for IT and internet users as well. You need more performing cables, and the same for the electrical installations. And I think that will have to be part of the renovation reflections. Do we need to improve the cables, and how do we actually serve the energy needs of the building? So that is implicit in the assessments to be done on the basis of the EPBD, but also the other energy legislation which is already in place and partly on the table again.
So we have a next question here for Bryce. It's also on this idea of heat pumps and whether they're appropriate for all buildings. So John Taylor says, heat pumps on their own in all buildings are not always the best solutions, particularly in old rural buildings. Should citizens also have the options of other renewable fuels or biofuels? Leonard Wessner from Liquid Gas Europe has the same question. Many rural off-grid communities mostly rely on LPG burned in condensing boilers, which can easily be replaced with renewable alternatives. If renewable alternatives exist, why ban boilers, the technology, rather than non-renewable fuels? Bryce, do you think that this allowance should be made for renewable boilers continuing to exist with renewable fuels, or maybe not, even in rural communities?
Quite agree. I mean, there's no problem with that. You can use your wood, you can use biogas, you can use solar heating. I mean, even solar heating, not electricity, but heating. It's incredible how it's not enough used. I mean, in the south of Europe, I'm very impressed to see that in Spain or in Israel or in other countries, you have a lot of these solar heaters just for the water. Works very well. And for instance, not enough in France. I'm very surprised. So we're trying to get that. So I quite agree. There's no problem, of course. I mean, I would say each location has its own solution, has its own environment, has its own resources. So we have to be flexible for that.
Stefan, is there enough flexibility there in the proposal, and is it a problem to ban the technology, the boiler, rather than the fuel type?
Yes, I mean the objective is decarbonisation and energy independence, getting away from fossil fuels, and I think what we need to ensure is that there are proportionate solutions which don't overshoot. Yeah? So if there are fuels which are fulfilling the decarbonisation objectives, it should be possible to use them, and the technology using those decarbonized fuels should still be in place. Yeah? So I think otherwise it would be a disproportionate overshooting of regulation, even at the national level, and that would be then, of course, not firstly not useful, and secondly, I would even say at least problematic, possibly even illegal, because it goes too far. Yeah? It's not justified by the objectives being pursued. What we have put into the EPBD is indeed a legal clarification for member states to put in place national bans. And I would say that, and it's clearly said that this has to be proportionate and justifiable based on sound objectives and non-discriminatory. And I think we have to take care that we don't ban something which would be usable for actually justifiable objectives, including decarbonized gases, to the extent that these are available, or other decarbonized or low carbon solutions.
John Taylor has a follow-up question here. It says that the EPBD, the new version, states that specifically renewable sources generated on site, and that might rule out renewable liquid gas and other renewable fuels. Would that language, renewable sources generated on site, rule out those renewable fuels that aren't generated on site?
Certainly not, because as part of the proposal, we have also made clear that there can be national criteria in relation to the energy which which is still needed, which is not generated on-site. I think the justification for on-site generation, and not only on-site but also through local organization forms such as energy communities or district heating solutions, that is justified by the attempt to reduce the pressure on the grid. But it says in the same legal text, even if it's in the annex, but this may be now in the further evolution of negotiations, be in the main text, which is the same legal standing, that of course there will have to be a residual energy coming from the grid, and that would have to be based on national criteria. And in the end, this is all an optimization. So an optimization to be done system-wide, what is most cost-effective. So and we are absolutely open because we have no, I would say, agenda to say it has to be local, and nothing else. This depends on the national energy system, how it's operated, what is actually the capacity of the grid, what are the existing investments in low carbon, renewable, or possibly other low carbon sources which are already available. And then a member state can optimize across the entire system what would be the best criteria actually to provide for that in the buildings, and also for other purposes, of course. I mean, buildings are just one part of society. There's industry and many other needs.
So if you'll forgive me, Stefan, we have a lot of questions for you. And so before we close out, I do want to put them to you because I think it's really important that the audience gets very interested in what the Commission's thinking is here. So I'm going to put 3 questions to you. First question is from Stefano Miriello from the European Heat Pump Association. It's about Article 15 of the EPBD, which forecasts that from 2027, member states must no longer provide incentives for the installation of boilers powered by fossil fuels. Should this date be brought forward, given the situation with Russia? Is there a risk that that date, 2027, will not be compatible with what's coming out tomorrow with REPowerEU? That's question number 1. Question number 2 is about HFC fluid. So that's from Jean-Pierre Owe. So one of the goals of European policy is to increase deployment of heat pumps, but at the same time, the European Commission proposes to reduce the quantities of HFC fluids placed on the market, which are needed. So the revised F-gas regulation could become a major obstacle to the development of heat pumps. That's question 2. And question 3... Actually, question 3 is also on F-gases. So from Yves Dandon. So heat pumps need F-gas. The F-gas directive could be in contradiction. How can we reconcile the ambitions of EPBD and this F-gas project? So basically, first question on 2027 phase-out date. Second question on the F-gas regulation.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dave. So indeed, the date of 2027 for the Commission to have proposed in December the end of financing for fossil fuel solutions was based on the balance at the time, which basically considered still fossil fuels, notably natural gas, as a transition solution, which was justified very much on the basis of even the environmental and climate credentials as a transition fuel, and the legal framework for financing, which is the recovery and resilience plans and the multi-annual financial framework, which basically has a planning horizon until 2027. And some member states had already agreed with the Commission, but also put in place financing for such fossil fuel solutions, notably gas, until then. So legal certainty, basically, and making sure that we have a balanced transition, basically. Now, of course, with the Russian aggression on 24th of February, we are confronted with a situation that the political objective in itself is to actually phase out natural gas, or reduce at least the consumption of natural gas much more quickly, because we know that we won't, at least at reasonable prices, be able to replace all the Russian gas within a reasonable time, or possibly not at all at acceptable prices. So for that reason, there's a very strong argument for saying actually 2027 is far too late. So there should be no financing anymore of solutions which we would actually no longer need, and we should get out of that more quickly than so far foreseen, or until then foreseen. But it's indeed a tricky thing, because some member states have already put in place basically a framework at national level which provides for that. So they would have to take at least reflect very strongly whether they can actually modify that as a reaction to the urgent need to phase out natural gas, at least for heating and cooling of buildings more quickly, because natural gas is a very precious good. It's much more expensive now, projected also for the foreseeable future, and we need that, I would say, primarily for industry. So because for buildings we have alternatives, and as a production factor for industrial processes, fertilizers, chemical industry, we don't have an alternative, so we need that. We have a current prioritization in an emergency for households, with industry being cut off, but we don't want, of course, the deindustrialization of Europe. We have to, from a structural point of view, put a certain priority on industry and try to get out of this precious commodity for heating and cooling of homes, of buildings, more quickly, because we have alternatives. So that is the difficult balancing act, and I think this is on the agenda of the co-legislators, and also the Commission might pronounce itself. I don't know what happens tomorrow, but it's clearly, the question is, can we do it more quickly? So that by anticipating basically the date. Then on F-gases, that's also a very careful balancing act to make here, because on the one hand, we want to improve as quickly as possible the climate performance of heat pumps. F-gases are dangerous for the climate. Of course, there are safeguards, that there are no leaks, etc., but the whole F-gas regulation is, of course, there in order to improve the climate performance of heat pumps, because there can always be leaks. So that is simply an unfortunate phenomenon which can take place. At the same time, we need to accelerate very much the number and increase the number of heat pumps. So this is the balancing act to make. How do we make sure that we get out of F-gases as quickly as possible while accelerating the deployment of heat pumps? And at the same time, of course, avoid leaks through appropriate safeguards in the heat pumps. So the trick is always a transition period. So to recognize that we can't do it immediately, but as quickly as possible. The proposal on the table by the Commission has tried, based on technical assessments, try to strike the balance. This, of course, is now also on the table of the co-legislators. We are aware of the challenges, the constraints, and also the concerns by stakeholders. But at the same time, the assessment has actually looked at alternative technologies which are less climate problematic or more climate friendly, to put it positively. And that is actually the question: is it technically possible to do this while increasing the number? And the F-gas proposal is a college proposal from the Commission, where, of course, we in DG Energy also have been involved and think this makes the trick. But of course, this is a legislative negotiation now. We need to look at all the arguments very carefully and see what is the optimal balance between, on the one hand, increasing the number of heat pumps as quickly as we need that, and ensuring the climate performance of the heat pumps.
For sure. So watch this space. I think some important signals for the co-legislators there. Very interesting discussion. I want to thank all of our panelists for some great insights, and also to the audience for asking some great questions. And thank you to all of you at home for following along with us this afternoon. We've got a big day tomorrow in the energy world, so we're all going to rest up and prepare for tomorrow. So thank you very much, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Thank you, guys.